Hello there, it's me again, and another reading, this time from The Toast of Time. Just to set the scene, Max and Markham have returned to St Mary's for nefarious purposes of their own, and Max has just realised it's a very special day, and she's on her way to annoy Commander Treadwell. I don't think Mrs. Partridge is capable of anything so pedestrian as a start of surprise, but she certainly raised an eyebrow when she saw me. "Trust me," I said, "I come in peace." And the other one. Then she waved me through. "You should come too," I said, as she got up to open the door for me. "You really won't want to miss this." Treadwell looked up with a beaming smile, which I think we can safely assume was because he thought I was the Parish Council. I've never seen a smile disappear so quickly. It was watching the Cheshire Cat being hit by a truck. Not being anything as classy as Mrs. Partridge, he executed several starts of surprise. I suspected I was the last thing he expected to see that day. "What are you?" I banged into his desk with the trolley because I'm not good at controlling things with four wheels, and there was a tinkle of overturned crockery. Mrs. Partridge frowned, although it wasn't the best crockery, so no great disaster. I said, "Sorry," and scrabbled to right the cups again. I finally had the satisfaction of knowing I'd caught Treadwell on the hop. I could see him trying to work out why I was here, why I was dressed like that, and what the bloody hell was going on. And lastly, but definitely not leastly, that the Parish Council would be walking through his door any moment now. "What are you doing here?" I ignored his question, pouring myself a cup of tea. I offered one to Mrs. Partridge because I'm polite, but she shook her head. I picked up another biscuit and rearranged the ones still on the plate, in the hope that no one would notice they were looking a little thin. Very thin, actually, since I'd had more than half of them. I sipped my tea and said casually, "Would I be right in thinking you thought you'd get more value for money from the non-HISSUP part of the security section by ordering them to do a few odd jobs when things are quiet?" "Possibly," he said a little stiffly, I thought, but interestingly, he made no move to contact HISSUP or to have me thrown out. I hadn't finished. "And would I be right in thinking it's the third Thursday of the month, which means it's the day for your monthly meeting with the Parish Council?" "Possibly," he said, still unwilling to commit himself, although everyone knew it was. I glanced at the clock, 3 minutes to 10. "Do you remember one of your many complaints about St Mary's was that it was almost completely unaware of the world around it?" He'd pulled himself together. "Is there some point to your maunderings, kitchen assistant Maxwell?" He'd always been a sarcastic bugger. I was grinning fit to bust. "And fourthly, and possibly most importantly, are you aware that today is actually—" I paused, all the better to build up the suspense— "World Naked Gardening Day. And yes, that is a thing. It's on Mrs. Mack's calendar downstairs." I saw him open his mouth to tell me not to be so ridiculous, close it again, struggle to take in the implications, and then, all of a sudden, push back his chair and move to the window. I joined him because there was no way I was missing this. Mrs. Partridge hadn't even bothered to try to account for her presence and was standing at the other window. Evans was marching his team smartly down the drive, a neat squad of 6, all in military formation, garden implements at the correct angle across their chests. They were all correctly kitted out with goggles, gloves, steel toe cap work boots, everything legal required for the safe operation of all those strimmers, scythes, axes, pitchforks and chainsaws, presumably, a sight to gladden any health and safety officer's heart, although from up here They rather gave the impression they were about to wage war on a small country. The most striking aspect of their appearance, for me anyway, I can't speak for anyone else, was that they were all stark bollock naked, with the main emphasis on the last three words in that sentence. I don't know what was passing through Treadwell's head just at that moment, probably a desire to kill us all and take refuge in the pub. And as he struggled with the situation, the gates opened to admit a small convoy of cars. The Parish Council had arrived. First, as always, was Mrs. Huntley Palmer, who swept through the gates in her not quite as classic as Dr. Bairstow's Bentley, a source of continual resentment for her, which Dr. Bairstow had never done anything to alleviate, often handing Markham his keys and asking him to ensure his car was parked strategically next to Mrs. H.P.'s in the car park. She slowed for a moment, as though unable to believe her eyes, although the evidence was dangling there for all to see, and then she sped up, scattering gravel in all directions. Her not quite as classic as Dr. Bairstow's Bentley screeched to an illegal halt outside the front doors. I caught a brief glimpse of her struggling to get out. Up next was the vicar, the Rev. Kev, pedalling sedately through the gates on his ancient bike, and a little flushed on a hot day like this. I'd met him once before, and he seemed quite a nice bloke, despite his calling. He rode past, waving at Evans, did a bit of a double take, and then pedalled faster, his eyes fixed sensibly on the road ahead of him. Two other cars, occupants unknown, slowed, and then slowed some more, and then sped up. The final car, a battered old Austin, even more ancient than its owners, contained Miss Peake and Miss Freen, who didn't mess about. There was none of this girly slowing down for a better look. They actually stopped and got out. Treadwell met my eyes. I gave him my best nothing to do with me look, because it wasn't, just for once, and started slinging plates and cups onto the briefing table. Once I'd got everything nicely arranged, I helped myself to the last chocolate biscuit and headed for the door. The last I saw of Miss Peake and Miss Freen, they were being greeted by Mr. Evans, who's a lovely lad and always very respectful towards elderly ladies. He stood to attention and threw them one of his best salutes, which I think both ladies very much appreciated. And then they all clustered around the rose bed, not too closely in some cases, presumably to discuss the curse of aphids and how to rid oneself of the pesky little buggers. Mrs. Huntley Palmer was just surging through the front door as I walked back around the gallery. I could hear her demanding to know the whereabouts of that Treadwell person and not to fob her off. So I didn't even try, pointing politely and informing her he was in his office and very much looking forward to explaining St. Mary's latest gardening initiative. Then I headed for the goods lift and laughed all the way back to the kitchen.